Welcome to Module 3, and in Module 3, we're going to be talking about exposure. No, not exposing yourself in the laboratory. I hope that you're not going to expose yourself to someone in the laboratory, but exposure to chemicals, which probably is a little worse. So if you're going to work in a laboratory environment, you're going to be exposing yourself toward those chemicals that you might know nothing about. So the whole purpose of this lecture module is to kind of tell you the steps that you need to take as an employee, as an entry-level student, on how to protect yourself from the chemicals that are in the laboratory. So here is an incident. And just like before, I'm going to start off with this lecture with this incident. And here's the basically story and the narrative for you. A young chemist was working in his research laboratory and wanted to protect himself from exposure to the chemicals he was using. Well, that's a good idea. I hope that he was. He used the chemical hood for his experiments. Check. That was good. And personal protective equipment. Goggles and gloves. Okay, so it sounds like this person is kind of trained. He knows what to look out for. He knows how he should behave and what to wear in a laboratory. So far he checks off all the boxes. He had selected rubber gloves and used them in the morning for handling his chemicals. And when he returned in the afternoon, he put on the gloves again and went to work. Now, some of you might read this sentence and you might say, rubber gloves, that's a no-no. Well, actually, it's not. You can have different materials to make laboratory gloves. Rubber is one of them. Latex is another. Nitrile is another. There's a whole assortment of different ones. So in this scenario, he just assumed that rubber was okay, and that's why he decided to use them. So don't let that throw you off. Sometime later, he became aware that his skin was burning and it had turned red. He then realized that he had to put on the gloves outside in, and now the contaminated outside with the chemicals he was using was inside in direct contact with his skin. The exposure was so severe that he required medical treatment and he could not work in the laboratory for 2 months. So here is a case, a scenario where someone was very aware, acutely aware of what was going on around them and how to handle certain chemicals in the laboratory. He put on the goggles. He put on the gloves. He was aware of the personal protective equipment he should have on, how to handle these chemicals. It sounds like this person was formally trained on what to do, but a slight mistake. Putting the gloves on inside out. And a little while later, those chemicals began to react with his skin. He took the gloves off, but the narrative never really does tell you what happened after the fact. It just says that he couldn't work in the lab for 2 months. So that's the purpose of this lecture module, and especially this very first section. What do you do when you expose yourself to chemicals, and what are the different types of exposure? So let's kind of start off with the basics here. Exposure. My handwriting's probably worse today than it ever has been. Good luck. When we talk about exposure, what we're talking about is really exposure to hazardous material. Okay, I could care less if you expose yourself to water in the laboratory. No big deal, right? We're all going to do it. That's not going to hurt you. What we're really referring to is exposure to hazardous material or some type of hazard in itself. So let's talk about the definition of hazard. It is and we've seen this before, people, it is a potential source of danger or some type of harm, right? So the key word here is potential. What does potential mean? Well, potential is something that's capable of being dangerous. So capability here. Capable of, and did I spell that wrong? C-A-P-A-B-L-E, capable of being dangerous. So we want you to protect yourself from hazards in the laboratory. That's basically what we've talked about in the previous two modules. Hazards is something that will have a potential to do harm. And if you can eliminate the potential, then you can eliminate the harm that might happen to you as an employee. So we're talking about exposure here. So if I'm going to expose myself, that means I'm going to come in direct contact with the hazard that might be present. Direct contact. So there's different versions of exposure here. Different ways that you can come in direct contact with these hazardous substances. So the first one is going to be ingestion. You're going to eat it. You're going to drink it. Now, you're probably snickering and you're probably saying, well, who on earth is going to eat a chemical? Who on earth is going to drink a liquid? We'll talk about maybe how this could happen in a laboratory. Number 2, breathing it. Call that inhalation. You inhale it. Don't be a Bill Clinton. He said that he used to smoke weed, but he didn't inhale it. Well, we kind of want you to be like that. We don't want you to inhale chemicals. But breathing it in is going to basically have you come in direct contact with the hazardous material. Again, we'll talk more details about this in just a few minutes. We're just going to list the different forms or the different routes that you could expose yourself with. Number 3, skin and eye contact. Yeah, you can get it on your skin. It can absorb. You can get it into your eyes. That's bad news. That is direct contact, though, with a hazardous chemical. And number 4 is basically trauma. Trauma is any type of puncture, any type of injection that might happen to you while you're working in the laboratory. So all 4 of these routes are very dependent. They're dependent on a couple of different variables. Number 1 is the dose. How strong is this stuff? What is the concentration of this stuff? That's going to be very important, right? So I'm going to put a big A beside of there. B, the duration. How long were you exposed to this stuff? Were you in the room all day, or were you in the room for just a couple of minutes? Did it get on your skin just for a couple of seconds, or was it actually there for minutes before you realized that something was going on? All of that plays a role in how we handle the exposure. And finally, the path. The path plays a significant role here. Did you breathe it in? Did you get it on your skin? Did you smear it on your lips? Is it inside of your lungs? Did you pour it on your shoe and then it soaked into your sock and then got onto your foot? The path is very important. So that's what this first part is going to talk about. We're going to go through the discussion of all 4 of these routes of exposure: ingestion, inhalation, skin and eye contact, and then finally trauma. We're going to talk about which one is probably going to be the most common out of the 4 that you're going to experience either as an entry-level student or an entry-level laboratory worker. And then we're going to relate that finally to dose, duration, and path. How bad is bad? When is the point of us determining you need to go see a doctor for that exposure? So come back and watch the next video. We're going to pick up from here, and then we're going to dive into a little bit more detail.